Welcome to Trinity Cleveland Online. I'm the Reverend Adrienne Cook, and today we are continuing our conversation on the centers of intelligence through the lens of love and the Enneagram. And we are now on our third and final type in the heart category of the Enneagram, type 2. And we'll learn a little bit more about them in just a minute. But I'm delighted to have Emily and Ginger here representing the 2 type structure, and they're going to introduce themselves in just a little bit. So first, let's take a look at the lens of love that we're looking through from a Christian perspective of spirituality in the Enneagram. And I'm going to invite our 2 interviewees to read for us this verse from 1 John and 1 Corinthians.
From 1 John, chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love.
This verse is from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails.
Thank you both. I'm just going to rewind to this slide as I name the 2 most common ways that the Enneagram type 2 is referred to, the giver or the helper. And we don't have to go too far into the heart center of intelligence to explore what love means for a type 2. It's rather central to the personality structure. The personality structure of type 2 strives to love and to be loved, and believes that the giving and receiving of love are deeply connected, and they're not wrong. But with the ego structure of the type 2, what it tries to perpetuate is the belief that in order to get love, you have to give it first. This is the falsehood that the ego structure comes up with. And that small lie creeps into the type 2 structure that 2s are ultimately seeking freedom from. So just as in the Christian scripture, in the book of James, James asks us, what is faith without works? The type 2 ego says, well, what's love without action? You have to show that you love. Now, we've explored a little bit of love from the other 2 heart types already. The Enneagram 4 ego seeks an ideal love that the ego will never be satisfied with. And the Enneagram 3 ego mistakes admiration for achievements, for love and connection. And like the journey of those 2 heart types, the type 2 is seeking freedom from the false perceptions of the ego. So the love is the good thing that is going to remain in the type 2, and it remains for all of us. But the means of getting and receiving love is what shifts for the type 2 as they move through their spiritual journey. And what is difficult when an individual is sort of stuck in the ego place of type 2. So if you're out there trying to figure out if you're an Enneagram 2, you can ask yourself, is it hard for me to be able to receive from others before I give to them? And this is connected to the defense mechanism of repression for the type 2s. Every single type structure has a defense mechanism that keeps the ego structure in place, keeps the ego thinking this is the way it has to be. I'm not going to get what I need unless I do it this one way. So 2s use repression, which means that they have this knack for stuffing whatever feelings seem unacceptable to them and converting those feelings into more acceptable emotional energy. So this might come out in niceness or kindness because the 2 knows that's really what I should be doing in this moment. So I'm just going to do it. And hopefully that'll get me what I ultimately need. And it works for a while for the type 2s, but then the 2s often admit there are times when that just doesn't work anymore. And I just need to find a way to be honest. And that's ultimately going to get me what I really need. So 2s repress this need to avoid that feeling of being needy. So the word need, when it's about others, is just this beautiful means for the 2 to be able to support and give. But when the word need is put back on the 2, it just feels needy to the 2, and they don't really like the way that it feels. And so they shift their emotional attention so that they don't have to feel that sense of neediness for themselves, and they can maintain just this image of being helpful for others. I don't have any needs. I'm just here to help you with yours. So the 2s are perhaps, of all the types in the Enneagram, the most genuinely interpersonal. It's genuinely interpersonal, genuinely available for connection, interested in connection. All the type structures need connection. But with the 2s, this idea of needing connection can get flipped. And so instead of the 2 recognizing, I'm the one that needs connection, the 2s can often project this need and say, you need me. I don't really need you, but you need me. And the reality is, right, need and love are all about this give and take. And the 2s know this innately, but that ego structure gets in the way sometimes. So long as the 2 can help others without ever being conscious of their own need or what they're getting, then the 2 ego structure is satisfied. But the 2s, if they stay in that ego structure, continue to seek some sense of freedom from always having to be the ones that help or always having to be the ones that give. And so that urge to find some freedom there is what can set them on this course towards spiritual journey and spiritual freedom. And I'll just, as a reminder, name that all of this talk about type 2 is not talk about our 2 guests, who are individual people with their own individual stories. And that's just a reminder for everyone that no one is their Enneagram number. And in part, that's really what using the Enneagram is all about, is learning about how to find your true self, to be that true expression of the child of God that you are, rather than just this trope that your type structure tells you that you have to be. So that's why we're exploring practices of receptivity and self-awareness and spiritual practices that can help people find freedom from their type structure. And that's exactly the journey of the type 2, is reclaiming freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of a world that really says that you can only be loved and approved of if you're fulfilling the needs of others. And many of us know in American culture and many other cultures that it's also a projection that's placed on women, that in order to be a good female, you've got to be the one that gives and that does. And so that cultural layer is placed on top of the type 2 and gives a lot of extra pressure for that type structure to stay in place and to not break free from this. But when 2s can break free, and they start to learn to pay attention to their own needs, which of course we all have, then they're able to receive from others, and they learn to give what's appropriate. And then they can experience the pure joy of giving for its own sake, freely and lovingly. And that beautiful flow of giving and receiving that they've been seeking happens naturally when you give from what you have and from what you can. I think the last thing that I want to say is that when 2s do find their way to this freedom, they learn that love is not a limited resource. It's not a limited resource that only comes to you after you give. It's always accessible. Love is always accessible. 2s are children of God. God is love itself. So we're the product of love. This awareness allows others to be able to give to twos and twos to receive, without the fear that needing something from others will create a sense of separateness, that in fact, having needs and giving to satisfy others' needs is something that connects us, that reciprocity connects us. But if you would just share with us how you know that you're an Episcopalian, how are you connected to Trinity, to the cathedral, to the Diocese of Ohio, and then how you know that you're a type 2. How did you come to learn that you're a type 2? What are some of the signs that this is the ego structure that you wrestle with in your life? And that can be based on anything in your life up to this point or anything that I've just shared in this presentation. Thank you for being here. Either of you like to go first?
So I'm Emily Culp Ashby. I'm actually not Episcopalian. I'm a pastor in the United Church of Christ, but I'm married to an Episcopalian priest. So all my exposure to the Episcopal Church comes through him, as well as my exposure to the Enneagram. So actually, I first learned about the Enneagram when we were first dating. Actually, it was one of our first dates, and I was meeting his friends. It was a 4th of July holiday, and I remember there were people kind of getting ready, putting out food in the kitchen. I was aware of this and thought, oh, I need to go help. So I went over, and I first thing I said was, how can I help? And then one of his friends turned to Steve and said, oh, she's a 2. And apparently they had, I guess, already had this discussion about he's always been very very interested in the Enneagram. And so of course, right then I'm thinking, oh gosh, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What does that mean? And so I wanted to learn more about what being a 2 is and whether I agreed with that or disagreed. And then also, it's natural, I think, for a 2 as well to want to dive into their significant other's interests. And so that was my first interest and exposure to the Enneagram, was wanting to learn more kind of because of him, because he's fascinated by it. And then the more I learned, the more it kind of became a meeting point in our relationship as we learned more about each other's needs and the way that we communicate. A lot of that was through the language of the Enneagram, and that was so helpful. It was really helpful to have that language, and for me, it's helped me become aware of my needs, because needs, Ginger, I'm sure you can relate, are it's kind of a dirty word for me. I can't connect to my own needs. I can connect to other people's needs. But in a relationship or a marriage, you're often kind of, it's really important to kind of understand what your needs are in order to have them met. Actually, I had never taken an Enneagram test. It was just the more I learned about the Enneagram and kind of the type 2 structure, it was like I was being seen. It was like, oh, something, wow, I didn't realize there was language around this, that this is actually other things. So I didn't feel as strange anymore. And actually just recently I took a test and it was like, okay, yeah. now it's confirmed, but
Well, I'm curious, what are some of the qualities that you said is kind of like a
being seen.
Yeah. What are some of the qualities that you remember where you're thinking, oh my gosh, you see me? And I know sometimes the qualities are, it's like, oh yeah, that's me on a great day. And other days it can kind of feel like a punch in the gut. So, share what you're comfortable with. But what are the things that you felt seen by as you were exploring this type structure?
I think number one, for me, my link to being a 2 is primarily through relationships. It's realizing that for me, relationships are paramount. I spend a lot of my time thinking about other people and thinking about how they're doing and what their needs And in the way that, as a pastor now in a church, it's always been very uncomfortable for me to kind of take that position. And the way that I've been able to kind of relate to that is through relationships. Well, I can start first with the people in the congregation. These are people that I care about. And then how can I kind of get to know them better through the lens of learning more about them. And then the other piece of that is I've always been attracted to vulnerability. It's always vulnerability is where I feel it's where I feel there's a way in, and that connection that for me it's like that moment when one person sees another person, and it's so powerful. And I feel like there are times that I kind of like live and die for this, like seeing somebody else, and I love that. And part of that is being attracted to others' vulnerability, seeing a way in.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you have hit a number of Enneagram 2 highlights as you've been sharing. So I'm going to just pull out a few of those before we turn our attention toward Ginger. But this concept you're talking about of the emotional vulnerability, this is part often described on the journey. I'm going to move us a few slides ahead here. On the journey of type 2, with this connection with 2 and 4. And so as 2s learn to appreciate the emotions that their defense mechanism often wants to suppress. So emotions commonly associated with needs are vulnerable emotions. So like if a 2 is feeling upset is a common word I'll hear a 2 start with. Well, what are you feeling? Well, I'm upset. Well, what does that mean? What are some of the emotions underneath that? Well, I'm sad, or I'm hurt, and then being able to sit with that and sit with the fear of the loss of connection that can come when a 2 says, I don't know, I'm feeling this. Does that mean are you still gonna love me? Can we still be friends? Is it okay if I'm feeling this thing? When a 2 can start to just allow that to be there, no matter how uncomfortable it is, they start to become so much more comfortable with the vulnerabilities of others, and are able to sit longer and longer in that space. And that's the movement of 2 toward 4. And if you'll recall from our, those of you who have been following along with this series, if you'll recall from the Enneagram 4 interview, that the Enneagram 4s are known for their authenticity of emotional expression. That comes quite naturally for a 4, but it takes a lot of work of reflection and sitting with uncomfortable feelings for a 2 to be opened up to that kind of vulnerability. So that's a movement from 2 toward a sense of security of self, to be able to sit and receive other people's emotion. Now 2s, when they do it, are still very much 2s and might often look for an angle of how they might support a person when they're hearing about their vulnerabilities, whereas a 4 may not do that. So the type structure is still active, but the 2 is going to be listening to, I know a care package that I can put together to meet someone who might just be feeling those very same things. And that's when we see the beauty of the type 2 really wanting to connect and offer something that's going to make a difference in somebody else's life. So that's some of what I heard that was connection with type 4. And there were so many other things now, but I think we might actually speak to some of them a little bit later. But is there anything else you wanted to respond to with what I just said, Emily, before we move to Ginger?
No, it's very powerful. It's helpful to kind of to put it in language. It's kind of something that you've always felt, and then to see it. Oh, okay. This this is another thing that
the type 2 structure. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for sharing. Ginger, could you tell us a little bit about your Episcopal connection and connection to Trinity, and some of the ways that you've learned that you're a type 2?
I became an Episcopalian around 1980, so I'm not a lifelong Episcopalian. During my college years, I began singing in an evensong choir at the college where I attended. And I really enjoyed worshiping there and what I was hearing from the pulpit. So I made a decision when I was in college to become a confirmed Episcopalian. So when I moved to Cleveland in about 1985, I started looking for one. And I found Trinity. Trinity was close to where I lived at the time, and I felt comfortable worshiping here. So that's how I got where I am now. I got married at this church. I had children and baptized them here at this church. And over a period of time, I was invited into leadership, and eventually in 2005 invited to take a position on the staff. So now my position is the Associate for Congregational Life and Membership, which incorporates a lot of interacting with people, as a matter of fact. A lot of my work has to do with ministries and small groups at the cathedral, a lot of activities, congregational type activities. So that kind of work fit my personality right away. How I became aware of the Enneagram was probably about between 8 and 10 years ago. The Trinity staff began to study different personality type programs. One was the Enneagram, one was Strengths Finder, another was Myers-Briggs. And I found all of them really helpful to help me understand how I don't want to say it told me who I was. It just helped me to understand my relationship with the other people that I was working with in particular. And it freed me up from some guilt that I might have had about what my personality type was, because I had a better understanding of who I was naturally, without trying too hard, without feeling guilty about things that I wasn't doing because those were not my strengths. So I took a test. I did on each of these. I took a test, and I was a little surprised, but not entirely surprised, that I came out as a helper. I also expected to find that maybe I might be a peacemaker, because I do try to do that. And also, I'm somewhat, in some cases, or I have been, a perfectionist in some ways. So I was expecting to come out one of those things, but obviously helper was the stronger of the types.
Thank you.
So that's where I am.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Again, just a gold mine of information here for type 2. So Ginger, first I want to start off with something that I wondered if you might go there, and it was something that Emily named as well. And it's that that 2s don't often strive to be in the limelight, but if the limelight is where they need to go in order to continue connection or invite deeper connection, and they can see those relational elements, 2s will step up. 2s will do it and find that their abilities and capabilities for interpersonal connection work quite well in leadership roles, and that they do have these tendencies that can look a lot like a peacemaker. And in the Enneagram system, that connection is described as with 2s and 9s and 7s are all in the positive outlook group. And so one of the things that peacemakers often do from a sort of 2 perspective might be, find the what's good. Let's find what's good and let's highlight that. Let's look at the positive. Let's allow that to be what brings us together. And so 9s can do that, 7s can do that, 2s can do that. no problem at all. That's where the attention goes, is to what's the good thing? What can I focus on that can keep all of us together, and all of this.
Team building?
Yeah, team building, sure. Natural team builders, let's put it that way. Natural enthusiasts, peacemakers, helpers, all of those in the positive outlook do have some of these qualities. So it's not surprising that a part of you was like, I might be in this group. And then something that Ginger has also named is the connection that twos have to point one. And every number has the availability of a wing associated with their number, and it has to be a number that's on either side of your core number. So for the 2, that's either a 1 or a 3. And the wings can heavily influence the way that the personality structure looks. So a type 2 with a 3 wing is going to be more image conscious and more direct with what they're feeling emotionally, what they want, and maybe less of what they need, but clear on what they want from a situation. And that's the type 3 energy comes that way. Whereas the type 1 might reserve and step back a little bit. If it's a 2 with a type 1 wing, might withhold their thoughts, steps back to sort of judge and gauge the situation, can sort of reserve themselves and hold back, and then share what they wanted. They still know what they wanted, but they're not quite as assertive with it in the moment, and often have that perfectionistic type of a bent. But any type 2 can tap into both of those. So it's not like you have to have one or the other wing, but sometimes you do favor one or the other. And it can change at different points in life. So, Ginger, when you were first looking at it, you might have had some really strong 1 tendencies, and maybe now in your life, you're able to, just name what you want a little bit more clearly, and it's easy for you to tap into that type 3. So these are just ways of looking at the Enneagram structure for those of you trying to figure out your Enneagram type. It can help flavor the type structure. So if you have that perfectionistic bent, you could still be a type 2. If you have that peacemaker bent, you could still be a type 2. And ultimately, you need to look at the core motivations behind the types, which is what we're drawing out in this conversation. And I'll also point out that in that sort of bent toward leadership, the ways in which 2s are able to engage in leadership, this also connects them to the number 8 in their triad. So 2s are at the center of a triad between 4 and 8. And where 4 is the security point, where 2s tend to go when they're feeling secure or integrated, growing in sense of self-awareness. 8 is where 2s tend to go when they're in a state of anxiety. And again, being in the limelight or being at the place in leadership that gets all of the attention, all of the responsibility, is usually not a 2's preference. And so it can be a place of anxiety when that pressure is put on a 2. But the point 8 is not always just a place of stress for a 2. Just like all of us, we can use those places of stress to really draw out some of our strengths. And so 2s are able to take on what here in this photo is described as the challenger. The 8 is also known as the leader or the boss. And so 2s can tap into that leadership energy, even if they're anxious about it, even if it's at a place of stress. And their leadership comes out in these relational, interpersonal kinds of ways. So you both spoke to that in different ways, and I appreciate those very clear connections you made on this Enneagram chart. So thank you very much for that.
Well, I found a connection to what you said a few moments ago about wings, about how the wings that affect you might affect you at different places in your life. And I have to say that certainly when I was younger, I probably was less likely to speak up and say things that I felt. And, once you've a little bit older, you have less concerns about what people think. and you also feel more confident in your ability to speak up and say what you really feel. So I have to say that certainly when I was younger, I might have felt more as a 1 wing. I'm probably a little more closer to 3 now.
Mm. And Ginger, can you think of any particular experiences that allowed you as a type 2 to just more clearly name what you need from a moment? And we can nuance needs and wants, or we can just talk about them in general for right now. But does anything rise to your mind over the course? You said you've been working with the Enneagram for 8 to 10 years. Anything that jumps out at you that might help other people recognize in their own story, signs that they could be tapping into their awareness of their own needs and wants more than they have been?
Well, I definitely think that being aware of your Enneagram type, if you're a 2, does help you to understand that you have a tendency to focus more on other people's needs, and to be aware that you need to work on your own needs, and that just the awareness of that need helps you to focus more on taking time out for yourself, and making sure that you accept other people's offers of help instead of trying to do everything yourself.
Mm. Emily, I see you nodding and smiling to that one. Did that one trigger any thoughts or stories in your mind?
It does. I think since tapping into the Enneagram, I've focused more on had an awareness of what my needs are, at least the language around that, and realized I never knew. Like, it was never something that I paid attention to. Um, I I had this realization, I guess this past year was my birthday, and my husband asked me, "So what do you want to do for your birthday?" And I said something, and he said, "Now, is that really what you want to do, or are you doing that because you think I'd like it?" And I thought, oh yeah, he's right. And then I came up with all these other ideas and realized I'm called to those because that's what I think other people would like.
Mm.
And my husband really challenged me and said, "Now, truly, what do you want? And I didn't know.
Mm.
Um, it, it's, and I still, it's really been one of those things that I've been challenged by, like, no, truly, don't don't be so influenced by the emotions of other people or what you think other people would like in this moment. And because I think for so long what I was responding to those around me.
Mm.
And so now, as I've I apologize, as I've I got more into the Enneagram and realized the importance of tapping into those needs, of tapping into, really what I'm wanting from a situation. Because the more you repress, that stuff inevitably comes back. It's going to in some way. And then it also helps to realize, like, I'm not an automatron. I have needs. My whole structure isn't just like, because I think that's the 2 ego structure, right? Is to kind of shut down, oh, I don't have needs. I'm here to help you, and this, like, endlessly giving. And you've, at some point, it's not a healthy way to be, and you've got to kind of shut that down. And so, yeah, they're paying attention to the Enneagrams really helped me understand the importance of self-care, and a lot of what Ginger is talking about.
And Emily, I think you bring up this wonderful point, that the Enneagram can give the awareness of, hey, as a type 2, you're not paying attention to your own need, which is super helpful. But then when you're invited to pay attention to your own need, the reality might be that when you look for it, you can't find it because it's not been a practice that you've been used to. And so part of spiritual practices for type 2s often involve finding support systems to help the 2 realize their needs. And oftentimes you may know what you don't want before you know what you do. And that's okay. That's okay. And that's part of the journey. And it sounds like that interpersonal bent that you have allowed your husband to be able to give some insight into you. And even just that relationship, is kind of part of that spiritual practice of him being a mirror to you, checking in, as someone who loves you. Is that really what you want for you? Or are you thinking more about me? And that's a great question to ask someone who's a 2 that you love in your life, to be able to be there for them.
Yeah.
Thank you for that example. Ginger, was there anything you wanted to bounce off of? We had a pretty hearty laugh there as you were hearing that.
I did, because what she said really spoke to me, that somebody might have asked you, what do you want? You didn't know. And I've had that experience where I was thinking so hard about other people that I didn't really know what I wanted. And I, like Emily, I'm grateful that my husband does know me well enough. I don't think that he figured this out from the Enneagram, because he's only just recently found out what the Enneagram was. But I think he understands it from knowing me, that I will tend to not look for my own needs. And when it comes to, what do you want to do this weekend? What do you want to do on your birthday? What do you want to do? At any given time was to force me to think about, did you want to go for a walk in the woods? Well, he knows that I would love that. Mm-hmm. So instead of, he just doesn't let me go there anymore. But again, I've been married for 30 some years. So, mm-hmm. And you're just married, Emily. So it's a wonderful thing that your husband recognizes that already.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and so let's play with this idea of learning how to know in the Enneagram structure. And I'm going to move to the next slide. Nope, not that one. We'll skip sin for now. I want to look at where the 2 shows up in their triad once more. So we already named that the 2 is connected to 8 and 4. And if you look on this slide, you'll see that 2 is a heart type, 8 is a body type, and that 2 does not have a direct connection with a number in the head type space. And so what that is trying to reveal in the Enneagram structure is that the knowing part, that the self-awareness piece that requires a head kind of knowing, being able to figure out what is it that I need. The 2 can figure out from the heart, okay, I definitely have a need there. They can even feel it in their guts that something is there and they've got to find it. But because there's not that head connection, there's a bypass that has to happen in order to get to the head connection. And there are a couple of ways that this plays out in the Enneagram. The first was a great example that Ginger just gave, and I saw Emily nodding to, was Ginger likes to go on walks in the woods. And and I don't want to project too much, but I could ask this question: is part of that because when you get your body moving, you find that you can think more deeply about maybe what's going on internally inside of you, or it's easier to express some of that? Like you can find like a deeper connection when you're moving your body. Does that seem true? It doesn't have to. I'm curious if that's anywhere there. Or is it just, hey, you can just turn off and you can just,
I think it's because I like to be there.
Perfect. So you like to be there. So something about it brings you into the present moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's beautiful. So that's also part of the type 2 projection. The 2s as a heart type are commonly future oriented. And so thinking about what can I do, what needs can I meet, how might this play out, and it can remove 2s from the present moment. And so in order for a 2 to figure out what do I need right now, the 2 has to be able to connect to the present moment. And so that example of walking in the woods is just one that I've heard other types do. I know a number of 2s where that's one of their favorite activities, is to go for a walk with somebody that they love, or a walk by themselves. And it is about this deeper connection, but it's this bypass of I need to show up just right now. I need to not be thinking about the future of anybody else's life and just be present to my own for a minute. And a birthday is a great day to maybe feel like you have the freedom, or you're allowed to do that as a type 2, to be able to focus on yourself for a little bit. So it's a beautiful, beautiful invitation. So that's one of the ways that the bypass can happen. The other bypass involves some of the history of the Enneagram structure. And I've talked about this when we were looking at the type 5 earlier in the series. But in the original drawings of going back to the 4th century, the triangles in the Enneagram were all, what's that called when they're all the same size? They all looked similar to the 9, 6, and 3. There were all these perfect triangles. And the original triangle connected 2, 8, and 5. And so what we call those long gone triangles in the current Enneagram structure are the triangles that are connected to the spiritual journey of the types that have that are missing one of the connections in the Enneagram. And so for the 2s, the 2 doesn't have that connection to the head types, but they do in the original drawings. And so those are invitations to deeper spiritual awareness. And it's often when a 2 is focused on spiritual and inward journey toward the inner self that they find that they are able to access point 5. They're able to do quite deep reflection on themselves. But it's not the natural structure that the ego wants to take them, because the ego is trying to suppress awareness of need, and so kind of turns off some of that that need to focus on the headspace when it comes to the self. You can try to figure things out for others, but when it's figuring it out for yourself, the energy isn't there until you're willing to dive into that spiritual journey. Any comments or thoughts on that? Does that seem to resonate or connect or make sense?
It does make a little sense to me. I think I'll have to look at it a little bit more, but this has been helpful.
Well, and there's one other piece that I want to draw out, which is that that 2s are not alone as not having access to one of the centers of intelligence. This was also true of the type 7. So if you look at, right, that's the exact reflection on the chart. The other side of the symbol shows that the 7 is connected to a body type and to another head type, and they don't have the heart connection. And so when we were talking about type 7, we acknowledge 7s are considered, they have the capacity to really be sort of the mastermind of the Enneagram, because when they are in, when they're just in an average homeostasis sort of a state as a type 7, they're a head type. And when they're at their best, they remain a head type. Well, this is true of the 2s on the in the heart type structure, that 2s on an average day, hey, they're great heart types. But when 2s are at their best, they become masters of the heart, masters of connection and relationship. So all of the energy that 2s are able to put into others, they are also then able to put into themselves. And then they become these beautiful masters of connection and heart, and why love in the Enneagram is so often associated with type 2, because it just flows, that giving and receiving flows so naturally for the 2 when they're at that place of health and integration and security in self. So the trade-off, right, for not having that immediate head center of intelligence connection when it comes to self-reflection, that question of what do I need? For lack of that, what the 2s lack there, they get twofold in the ability to make that heart connection. And so that's sort of the trade-off that the Enneagram system is trying to reveal. And it also means that a great spiritual practice for a 2, particularly because 2s like interpersonal relationships, is to get to know an Enneagram type 5, somebody who is just always in their head. And that's their normal state, is to think deeply and self-reflect. But they do so without a direct heart connection. So I offer that if you ever learn that you have a 5 in your life, or there's a 5 out there, might want to put on some of that eager energy that 2s can muster and say, hey, we should be friends. I have a lot I should learn from you. The 5s will love that because they love teaching and they love knowledge, and it can be a really cool connection. Well, thanks for letting me wax on a little bit about that knowing space. And sometimes 2s are perceived as being so over-focused on someone else's needs that that there's an assumption that the 2 knows more about what you need than what you know about your own needs. Does that make any sense there? I see a smile coming there. Emily, was there something you wanted to say connected to that? The sort of assumption that 2s can have of really knowing what someone needs even better than they know themselves?
I think there's a tendency, especially for me, to project my way of doing things, because I tend to, in my thought process, I'm thinking specifically of kind of my home life with my husband and just kind of doing things around the house, that I have a tendency to project, well, this is the way that things should be done. We get things the most accomplished if we do it this way. And then it's kind of, I think it's less about me trying to control the situation and more me trying to like help. Let me help you, like show you the best way to do things. And it's taken me in a lot of conversation to kind of get to a point of like, he is helped by not, by me not projecting on them.
By letting him figure out whatever the best way is for him to do it, rather than what the best way was that you figured out how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for connecting that.
I'm trying to think if I have ever, tried to tell somebody that I know better what they need than they do. Boy, I would fight against that feeling. I do know better how to load the dishwasher than my husband does. So that's the thing in my house. I just say, put the stuff in there and I'll arrange it before I run it.
Well, Ginger, I think that's a great example of the reality of that tendency in the type 2 to assume that their way is maybe the best way to do it, the most efficient, or for whatever the reasons are, the most, efficient in terms of time, or it's not going to put anybody out for it. But also the 2's tendency to not want to be conflict avoidant. So, you know what? I'm going to end up loading the dishwasher the right way, but I'll just tell you, throw it all in there, and I'll handle it later. But then at some point, and I don't want to, project anything onto this particular instance, but you can imagine that at some point, if that continues to happen over and over and over again, that a 2 might say, you know what, couldn't you just ask me one day how to load the dishwasher and I could show you? Wouldn't that make it easier for all of us? So the 2 sort of puts it on their shoulders to make the thing happen. And then can feel sort of like, oh, I wish I didn't have to do this on my own all the time.
You mentioned conflict avoidance. That's not something that you have mentioned earlier. Is that a 2 trait?
Oh, it certainly is.
Okay.
Certainly
I thought maybe it was, but we hadn't mentioned it before.
Yeah. Does that feel familiar to you, that might be something you consider?
It does, because again, I try mostly to be a team player in what I'm working on, and so conflict avoidance, working together is always my goal.
Mm-hmm. What about with you, Emily? Is there anything about conflict avoidance that comes to mind? Any stories or connections that might help people realize if there are 2?
Actually, I think what I was resonating most with was you're talking about kind of the tendency to kind of just take things on as a way, of being conflict avoidant, but also as a tendency to think like, to repress your own needs and to think, well, I can do this. I always think about if say it's a task that needs to be done, I'm thinking of at church, and right now we're trying to manage virtual worship. And I've found that I tend to be the person who kind of does everything behind the scenes, because it's kind of like well, I'll take it. I'll take it. It's no problem. I'll take it. I don't have any needs, and I can handle it. And then it's later when I'm trying to realize, oh wait, this is actually pretty hard. It's hard to do all of this by myself. I have a tendency to try and kind of take things on so as I don't burden other people. I don't want to ask somebody else to do this aspect of worship or whatever it may be, because I don't want to bother them. And so if they don't initiate, then I'll just take it on, and to the end that I'm just piled high with, all these plates, and realize, oh yeah, the thing that I was trying not to burden them with is I was trying to respect more of their need, and in the end didn't respect my own needs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That really helps point out how the vice of pride shows up in type 2. So, we already talked about how 2's defense mechanism is suppression. So if a 2 hears the word or the connection with pride, they're going to be like, no, I'm not allowed to be prideful. They're not going to feel that, not going to make that happen. So the word itself is kind of a turnoff for 2's, but the way that it manifests, it makes so much sense in the type 2 structure. It shows up as this confident assumption that I can do it all myself, right? And so it becomes a burden for the 2 ultimately. Like the 2 loves to be able to do things for other people when the 2 really can do it. When the 2 has the energy, the resources, the joy for the activity, the 2 would love to be able to do that for you. That's freedom. That's freedom. But when the 2 is doing something perpetually that they don't feel equipped for, they think other people should be doing, and they're just not stepping up to the plate, but the 2 keeps doing it anyway. That's how pride shows up. Well, I'm the one that's just going to do it. I can do it. I can do it. And really, you know what? The 2 has other needs. The 2 can't do everything. The 2 does need to be able to name at times, even at the risk of conflict or the risk of the possibility of separation. That's the real fear for the 2. Because if the 2 is willing to risk that, then they really can actually begin to be known by the other, and then the other can actually give them what they need. But it takes that whole process of what the 2 perceives as conflict as a negative thing in order to be known. And when it happens enough, right, the 2 realizes, oh, well, conflict is just going to be a part of it, and we can often either find a compromise, or the person's really excited to do the thing that I thought they would hate. And that just blows the mind of the 2. You mean I've been doing this for 6 years and you would have done this all along? Dang it. I wish I would have asked sooner. So it doesn't always work out in the 2's benefit to try to do everything for themselves. And that's what the Enneagram structure is trying to get the 2 to realize. Anything else that you all want to say connected to that? Does that resonate, or anything you want to push back on?
I think what you were saying was the 2 taking on so many tasks could also lean towards the perfectionist end. In other words, I'm doing it the right way, and I need for other people to do it as well before I'm ready to give it up. Right. And that's just not the case, because as you say, oftentimes you'll find out that other people are quite good at doing it and that they want to do it. And you just have to at least temporarily remove that assumption that you're going to do it, and try to strive. And it takes some work to not only to look for your own needs, but also to look for opportunities for other people. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and I imagine as someone who does a lot of volunteer coordinating, Ginger, that's something you often have to try to figure out is what am I able to let go of here, and what am I able to invite others into as part of their joyful worship, as part of the experience of Trinity. So it's a beautiful individual self-practice that also then bears fruit for an entire community to be able to offer it that way. We have reached the final slide in our conversation, which is just a snapshot of the Enneagram 2 and ways in which, if you're trying to figure out your Enneagram number, you might recognize yourself. And so I'd like to invite the panelists just to take a moment and reflect on this image. And if there's any stories that come to mind or anything that you like on here that you just want to share about the type 2, something we haven't talked about yet that maybe you'd like to touch on, just feel free to share.
So what I'm seeing is that around the edges are the things that we need to work on. The awareness of our own needs, asking for help, taking care of themselves, developing healthy boundaries. Those are the things that we need to work on.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't noticed it was sort of structured in that way.
Yeah, I was looking at the very top, and it says natural givers, open, generous, connected, and unconditional. And I was thinking about how, in my own experience, my desire to always have connection first. That's what I want in a relationship. Can also backfire on me because I've noticed that in my quest to kind of build relationships, to see connection in people, I'm led to connect often with people that kind of would be unlikely relationships in a sense, to kind of reach out. If it's almost like a challenge to me a little bit. If, oh, here's someone that I think they seem really standoffish. They seem, I need that connection. I need to like have that like bond a little bit. And then entering in is kind of an affirmation for me of, oh, look, I can kind of break down boundaries. But it can go the other way because obviously by breaking down their boundaries, I can also disrespect my own boundaries. And there's a tendency then to just, if my main goal is that relationship, that connection, then to just give and give and give to the point of wanting it at all cost. So there's been time we're talking about the pride piece. I pride myself on being able to build a connection with, whether it's the waitress at the restaurant or whether it's the toll booth operator or whether it's, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's a smile. It's something that I can feel, oh, okay, we connected on like a human level. But to continually do that is exhausting. And then there's a tendency to kind of disrespect your own boundaries.
Well, I have a question and a comment. One was, did you watch the Enneagram 3 interview that we did?
Yes.
Okay, because those were the exact examples that the threes gave, was the restaurant person and the toll booth person. So I was like, you just gave away your wing over here. Type 3 connection there. But something that I hear that's connected to what you're talking about, that I've heard other twos name, is that twos really need to take time to examine their relationships when it comes to determining who is a real friend to the two. And because twos are so, the focus of attention is on others, that twos can find that when they do realize they have needs and they look around, they're unsure of who they could trust to actually meet some of their needs, because so many of the relationships were established by the two doing for another person. And so there comes a point where the two realizes, I need to be able to discern in my relationships whether someone else is giving me anything back. And that you need some of those relationships in your life, right? You need places that are safe to receive, just as you need places that are safe for you to give. and people aren't going to manipulate you. They may not give much back, but it feels good to give because you see that it's being genuinely received. And that's a beautiful thing that twos can do. So not every relationship has to be an equal give and take, but friendship does. Friendship has to be as close to that as possible, to be able to have a place of mutual support. And I think that for those that are trying to figure out, am I a type 2? This question of friendships and true, authentic friendships might be at play. Does that resonate with either of you? Have you ever been at a point where you've had to ask that question for yourself, or been deeply appreciative when you've realized you did have some people in your life that you could see that way? Or is this kind of a new angle to receive it on?
In my mind, I've connected that to what is kind of the primary need of it too, which is worth. And so it's in those relationships that I feel safe, that I feel worthy, that I feel seen, are those relationships that I feel grounded to pursue. But often in that quest to find worth, you tend to give in an attempt to find that worth from other people. And one of the things for me that's been, okay, this is a good relationship, is when I feel respected, when I feel affirmed. And so a marker for me of not a good relationship to really pursue is when I don't feel that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and words of affirmation, I have heard 2 after 2 name, hey, that's my love language. Yeah. Let me know I'm doing okay. And that's often enough for me. If you can just let me know that this is working and that we're good, that's really helpful for a 2 to experience.
Yeah.
Anything that you want to share there at all, Ginger? It doesn't have to be, but just want to make space.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever analyzed my friendships that way, so that I feel like, but I do feel like for the most part that my friendships are different than the people I'm trying to help. Mm-hmm. So I can separate the people that I do things with for fun from the day-to-day people that I'm looking to help or connect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll just name 2 that I appreciate, even just the language that you just used to convey that thought, that you haven't really sort of analyzed or reflected on friendship, but 2s. So, and again, that points to, like, there's not that direct connection with one of the head types. It's just that's not the way that the 2s often think. Right. But the 2s are deeply intuitive, and so your connection to 8, which is a body type. 2s often talk about having to draw energy from 8 and in the Enneagram structure. And that's how they do a lot of their thinking is, well, my intuition is quite strong. This is a healthy relationship for me. This makes me feel good. This feels right to me. And 2s often move on that deep place of intuition, even if they haven't done the analytical work behind it. You've been able to find deep, lasting, good friendships, without having to analyze them. So that movement toward 5 is an opportunity for spiritual journey, but it's not the only way that 2s find deep connection and true lasting love and relationships. So I appreciate the way that you just revealed that for us with just your language, being a 2 over there.
Being a 2.
Just being a 2. Well, I want to share a little anecdote from my own life that is triggered for me when I look at this slide, and it's the image of the Enneagram 2 in the bubble bath, and it says, need some pampering. It reminds me of someone that I had in spiritual direction once, and I have permission to share this story. But we were trying to tackle that question of what do I need right now? And one of the ways that 2s have described that they're able to begin asking this question in sort of a practical way is revealed in this story. So I asked the spiritual directee, what do you need right now? And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, let's pretend that you're not you, that you're someone in your life that you're trying to help. Analyze everything that's going on in this person's life. And, what do you think you would want to do for them? And so she decided, I would definitely, if I heard about all this stuff, I would send them a care package. And I was like, well, what would you put in the care package? And she had it all planned out. Well, I normally would do something like this and this and this. I would get these little, a cozy pair of socks and like a bath bomb and a candle and maybe like a little fun, playful book, maybe with cats or something like that just to give them a laugh. And so we did this whole care package. And then I said, okay, I want you to go shopping and buy all of those things for yourself. And I'm going to pay for it from like the discretionary, like this is a care package for you, but you get to pick everything that you want in it. And she was just like, oh my gosh, like I'm allowed to do this. And she realized, it helped her realize that often the things that she projected that other people needed were really the things that she needed for herself. And she loved all of the things that she wanted to give to somebody. And that it began to open the door to the idea that maybe sometimes I can give these to myself if no one else is giving them to me. So when you need some pampering, I offer that as a potential spiritual exercise as a tool. You could ask yourself, what would I do for somebody else? And, can I make some space in my calendar to give myself this for 30 minutes? That would be really nice. I'd appreciate it. You can give yourself a little pat on the back and tell yourself how much you appreciate you. And that's that. It might sound silly, but that's the awareness that love is always accessible right here. You are that beautiful created child of God, and love is never inaccessible. It's always right here. So I will close with that little story and with this prayer, as I like to do. So at the end of every one of these Enneagram interviews, I've been drawing on prayers from Sandra Smith, who is a life coach and has an MDiv, and she does Enneagram work in Asheville, North Carolina, in the narrative Enneagram tradition. And she likes to come up with descriptors of who God is, as she sort of puts herself in that Enneagram type and gives God a new name from that Enneagram type structure. And so for the type 2, she calls God the loving lap. So this image of God as one whom, when you just need to rest and to just feel cared for and loved, all you have to do is crawl right up in and snuggle in, and those arms are just ready to wrap right around you and hold you in all the ways that you love and that you need. And so I invite you both to pray with me to our loving lap. Let's pray. Loving lap, as I rest in your care, anchor me in humility, that I may continue to know myself more and more and honor all the gifts that you have given me, as well as my own limitations. I desire to be real, to know what is mine to do, and to know what is mine that is not to do. Empty me of my need for external approval, and let me receive the appreciation of others in whatever ways they can offer. Guide me toward receptivity, that I may participate more fully in my life, offering myself compassion, even as I so easily offer it to others. Dissolve any pride in me that is unhelpful, that I may be more available to my own needs and to the present unfolding of my life without expectation of having to have an agenda. Open my heart to receive the support of others, and remind me of my interdependence so that I don't need to inflate my own abilities but instead I can remain grounded in the reality of the beauty of who I am. Grant me a willingness to be open to what arises so that I can truly find freedom in your unconditional knowing and unconditional love. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I appreciate your vulnerability and your sharing, and it truly is helpful. So I'm glad that you're both helpers and you're both here connected to life at the cathedral. And next week, for all of you who are watching this series, we will move out of the heart types and we will begin to move into the body types with types 1, 9, and 8. And we will move toward the perfectionist. So some of what we've heard here today with Ginger's connection to that one wing, we're going to see more fully explained in the type 1 Enneagram structure in just another week. So thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.